right, we're really delighted to be here right now to present the Darwin Medal. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Darwin Medal, it is the most prestigious award that is given by the International Society for Reef Studies for somebody who has a body of work that is quite extraordinary. Everybody in this audience wants to be the people who have been given the Darwin Medal. Well, I do anyway. And so when we look at the previous recipients of the award, many of them are here in the audience today, and in fact, we're going to do a group photograph at the end of the Darwin Medal holders all together. We have the inaugural medal to David Stoddard. We had the next to Peter Glynn, Ian McIntyre, who I think is not going to be present here today for the photograph, Yossi Loya, who is for sure here, Charlie Veron, Terry Hughes, and Jeremy Jackson. Today, we're here to present the Darwin Medal to Jack Randall, who has an absolutely extraordinary body of work. And I am not the expert in this area, and so I have decided to step aside and turn the microphone over to Peter Sale, who will introduce Jack and introduce his talk. But before I go, I would love to present this year's Darwin Medal to Jack.
Oh, is this it?
This is it.
I'll melt it down and take the gold.
So beautiful, Jack. Congratulations. Congratulations.
Welcome. I wish it wasn't happening.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a distinct honor to have the opportunity to introduce Jack Randall to this group, even though many of us have known him for a long time. For those of you who work with reef fishes, Jack has done for the thousands of species of reef fishes around the world what John Wells and Charlie Veron together did for the somewhat fewer thousands of species of corals. He's made sense of the amazing biodiversity. For those of you who are too young to have known what it is like to work with a poorly known fauna without field guides, Jack led the way in ensuring that you would never have that problem. For those of you who believe that a DNA fingerprint somehow obviates the need for the kind of science Jack does, God help you. And I know there are a number of reef fish geneticists here who would agree with me. Jack commenced his undergraduate studies at UCLA, but World War II interrupted. He returned to the university in 1947, completing his Bachelor of Arts degree in zoology in 1950, Phi Beta Kappa. He then had the opportunity to do a PhD with Bill Gosline in Hawaii. So he sailed his small ketch across from California, moored it in the Alawai Yacht Harbor, and that's where he lived as a graduate student. Nowadays, graduate students at the university don't get to live in the Alawai Yacht Harbor, as far as I know. Jack completed his PhD in 1955. I've seen it. 2 thick volumes, 1 a systematic revision of the surgeon fishes of the world, a group that's particularly well represented here in Hawaii. The other one, a life history study of the Hawaiian manini, one of the commonest of those surgeonfishes. Either half of his thesis would be equivalent to 2 theses in any university today. It's not just the coral reefs which have deteriorated over time. On completing his PhD, Jack received a fellowship from Yale University and the Bishop Museum. His task was to evaluate several species of snapper and grouper in French Polynesia that were being considered for introduction to the grouper depauperate reef faunas of Hawaii. He sailed his catch to French Polynesia and did that work. But while he was in French Polynesia, he also managed to accomplish far more. He did pioneering work on the causes of ciguatera. He did behavior studies on cleaning, on spawning, and on other aspects of social behavior of various reef fish. And of course, he did a certain amount of taxonomy. Having finished that fellowship, he sailed back to the mainland and took a position at the University of Miami, and shortly thereafter moved to the University of Puerto Rico. It was while he was in Puerto Rico that he did some pioneering work on the effects of grazing in coral reef systems. It's interesting that we're talking about grazing even now. He was doing it in the early 60s. In 1965, Jack came back to Hawaii, initially as director of the Oceanic Institute, but then very quickly moved to the Bishop Museum, where he remained until they required him to retire at 2009. He continues to publish. During his career, Jack has participated in or led 177 field expeditions around the world. He has published over 878 papers. He has described 30 new genera of reef fish and 815 new species. He's particularly proud of the fact that 97% of those species he described remain valid. Jack Randall has named more species of fish for marine environments than any other ichthyologist, living or dead. And yet he remains humble, generous with his time and expertise, and particularly willing to help young scientists or scientists from developing countries. And when we put together the nomination of him for the award, and I should acknowledge that Mark Hickson was the person who had the idea of nominating him. When we put the nomination together, we reached out to about 15 people in his field around the world. Some of them were former students or colleagues, some of them weren't. Every single one of them wanted to write. We had to limit their letters to no more than 2 pages, and the letters that came in were absolutely amazing. Jack and I share the fact that we had Bill Gosline as our mentor. I benefited greatly from Jack's thesis, which was conveniently sitting on Bill Gosline's bookshelf. And I read the relevant sections of the biology half several times over, marveling at how much detail there was, how much information there was. The work which I did on Manini was built upon his foundation. And so very directly, I have benefited from the work he did, as have many other people through the years. When I completed my own PhD about a decade after he did, I acknowledged lots and lots of people, but I didn't bother to acknowledge Jack Randall. He'd done some stuff in the past, and I had used it and appropriately cited it. I didn't acknowledge him for writing it, but I do so today, because my work was helped by this amazing man. I offer you Jack Randall, the latest recipient of the Darwin Award. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay. Let's see, for a minute I had the first slide and now I only have my face here. Oh, there we are. Okay. Well, I grew up in Southern California and showed an early interest in fishes. I graduated from a goldfish bowl to a tank of tropical freshwater fishes. And then one time the biology teacher took the class to Palos Verdes at the base of the cliffs. So these are wonderful big tide pools at low tide. And I was enthralled. I must have a marine aquarium now. So I hauled seawater in 5-gallon glass bottles from Santa Monica Pier to my home 7 miles away and filled a 25-gallon tank with it. And then I went down and collected all these nice things. But I had an aerator stone, but put sand on the bottom. That was a mistake. And next morning, everything was dead or dying. So that was a very bad experience. But I learned to just put a few fishes in, and sea anemones were very good. And then one night, about 20 gallons of seawater went on my father's den floor, and that was the end of my marine aquarium. Well, I entered university at the University of California at Los Angeles, UCLA, and had only one semester when I was in the enlisted reserve corps, and it was called active duty. So I spent 3 years during the war and ended as a medical administrative officer in a large Army General Hospital. So that made me stay a little longer in the service. And I came out in 1970, what is it? Anyway, it was the start of the summer, and I had to wait until it re-entered the university in the fall. So I decided to take up snorkeling, and the swim fins at that time looked like frog feet, and the face masks were circular and in hard rubber, and they leaked terribly. You had to fit them in with sandpaper and so on. And in Southern California, where it's cold, around in the low 60s Fahrenheit, and I got out of the Army with my uniforms if I wanted them, but I had long john underwear. So I thought, I wonder if I rubberized that, whether that would make me warmer. So I got a big wash tub of latex rubber and hung my long john underwear up to dry. So I may have had the first wetsuit. I don't know. Anyway, I had an interest in sailboats from an early age. I had made models of sailing ships and so on. And I had the time on my hands, so I bought this sailboat in a sad state of disrepair and fixed it up and sailed for the summer. And then when I went down to the Army Navy surplus store looking for some anchor line, all amazing amount of material could be obtained at very low prices in these stores. And I saw something on the floor I didn't know what it was, but it looked like a scuba tank, but there wasn't any scuba tank that I knew of. And it was wrapped in wire, and then it had some sort of a gadget at one end, and then there was a tubular thing and another gadget, and then finally a mouthpiece. And I said, what's this for? We said, I'm told you can put air in that and go underwater and breathe. Really? How much does that cost? $25. Never mind the anchor, I'll take that. So I made a simple backpack and I put this one unit here and then, where am I going to get air? Oh, I know, I'll go to a welding shop and I can get oxygen. So I hear a few gasps in the audience. So I filled it with oxygen, and then I needed to clean the bottom of my boat, so I played around just in the harbor in shallow water. Then someone told me, if you'd gone to 30 feet, you wouldn't be here today. Oxygen is lethal in the deep water. You know, I thought, okay, that's learning the hard way. Yeah. Anyway, let's see, I have a friend of mine was at UCLA, and he went to the University of Hawaii. And he wrote back, he said, this is the place for you, Jack. I mean, the fishes are beautiful, and, you know, he kept on. And I thought, wouldn't it be a great idea if I could get a big enough sailboat to sail over to Hawaii and then live on it as a student? So I started looking around, and finally, of course, I couldn't afford a sailboat I wanted, but I found a hull for sale. 37 feet long, and it was beautifully built with mahogany planking and teak deck. Another man had bought it and decided he was going to have a fishing boat, and he put an engine in it, and then he put it up for sale. And I thought, $3,000, and well, I got a friend who had just graduated from MIT as an engineer, and he was the brains and I was the carpenter. My father had been a building contractor and showed me how to use tools when I was just a boy. So we spent a year rebuilding that. We had to put on a keel and put all the interior in and design the sail pan and so on. It took us a year working on weekends, and then we decided to name it Nani, which is Hawaiian for beautiful. He knew the plan I was to take it to Hawaii, but he would have priority sailing while we were in California. So I paid off his interest after earning money by various ways, such as taking the boat charter groups of fraternity kids to Catalina Island and so on. I was even a babysitter among my clientele was Richard Widmark. And anyway, I raised enough money to pay for Howard, and I got 3 college kids to sail to Hawaii. It took us 28 days because we had 2 periods of being becalmed. And then arrived in Hilo. We have I can see a man from Hilo here today that used to scuba dive with me on the Oahu, Gordon Tribble. Anyway, the good diving and the snorkeling and the clearer water was on the other side of the big island called the Kona Coast. And I went around there, and for the first time, I saw a coral reef. And I know Hawaii is marginal for coral reefs, but still it was a beautiful sight to see for the first time. And the fishes are absolutely, you all know how beautiful Hawaiian fishes are. By the way, the Hawaiian fish fauna is the percentage endemism is now 26.6, the highest in the world. Well, we sailed on to Honolulu, and I was away from the boat when the crew were interviewed by a reporter. And then next morning, an article came out in the newspaper that Dr. John Randall has sailed his yacht to Hawaii to join the University of Hawaii as a professor of zoology. You can imagine the reception. Come in, professor. Well, I met the other teaching assistants that, let's see if this will work. This is my boat, the Nani, en route, or, you know, under sail. And the first teaching assistant that caught my eye, if this works, this is Helen Au. Her last name is A.U. Chinese, and it's pronounced just like you've stepped on something painful. And we were each given a laboratory to teach in embryology. And we had to share the same room and the same microscopes. And we went into her class would be first and mine would be later. And we walked in and there was a live hen and a rooster running around. And she explained, we have to demonstrate to the students the reproductive organs of the chicken. Oh, I said. Well, she saw I didn't even seem to know what to do, so she prepared the birds, probably mothering under herself helpless males. And at the end of the day, I said, you know, it would be a shame to just throw these chickens away. I live on a sailboat down at the yacht harbor, and how about joining me? Well, cook a dinner of chicken tonight. And that was our first date. Well, let's see what we have here next. There we go. Well, this is Hanauma Bay, and I had an early interest in surgeon fishes, and they're herbivores, feed on algae. So I took an early course in algology from Dr. Doty, and he took the class to the bay, and he was walking in the intertidal, and the students were collecting algae, and he says, why aren't you getting any algae? I couldn't find any. And I said, well, maybe my surgeon fishes are feeding on it. Well, how could you show us that? Well, I put a cage on the bottom, and then they couldn't get the algae, and it's true, the algae should grow. Well, do it. Well, I did, and I put the cage down, and then I waited a couple of days and came back, cage was gone. Well, I thought, I've got to go someplace where there's not many people, this is Kealakekua Bay and the Big Island of Hawaii. And if you get over, it's a marvelous place. The fishes are very tame, of course, and you can see up at the upper part, that's Captain Cook's memorial. He was killed by Hawaiians there, and that little piece of land is British soil. So the boat here at the bottom is dispatched these swimmers that you see, and when the boat leaves, the bay is empty. It's amazing. So I thought, this is where I'm going to go. So during the vacation, I went over there and put my little cage down and ended up with a little paper in ecology on overgrazing of algae. I don't seem to be able to get this moving. Well, halfway through the semester, Professor Hyatt, who was the head of the department, asked if I'd like to go on an expedition to the Gilbert Islands and be Dr. Banner's assistant. Well, Dr. Banner is a invertebrate biologist, so he said, you'll be the ichthyologist. I said, me, the ichthyologist? Gee, why have I been chosen? Well, we're going to take a sailboat down, and you can be crew as well. Oh, well, we ended up going on a U.S. Coast Guard buoy tender, and I had a wonderful summer in the Gilbert Islands. I might point out that these islands were, at that time, under the jurisdiction of the U.S. Navy. They had been British before, and then they've been taken by the Japanese. So until they were all worked out where to go, why it was in charge of the Navy, and the Navy was sponsoring these expeditions, so they learned something about atolls. Anyway, it's the outer reef of the atoll I was on, and when it's a calm day, you could go out to the edge there where the surf is and dive in, and this was another revelation. It's the outer coralliferous terrace, goes from about 8 feet and steadily deemed to about maybe 60, 70 feet to a drop off. And it was just solid live coral. I've never seen anything like it. And the fish, of course, were marvelous. So I collected 396 species of fish and came back to the department chairman and I said, I'd like to do this for my PhD thesis. We said, well, that's straight taxonomy. We don't accept that. Here's what I suggest you do. You're going to get Office of Naval Research support for your work in the Virgin Islands, in the Gilbert Islands. But what you ought to do, you're interested in surgeonfishes, take the surgeonfish family and do a revision of it. And then pick one fish and do the biology. And I said, that sounds fine in my ignorance. And so what I ended up doing, it took me 5 years. I just was ignorant of how long it would take. And I'd still be doing it, I think, if my professor finally came in and said, no more, Jack, publish now. So the head of Fish and Game, what was called the Division of Fish and Game at that time, Vernon Brock, had planned to bring some fish in from Tahiti, the groupers and snappers as good food fishes. So I went to see him and I said, don't you think you ought to send somebody down to Tahiti and find out something about the biology of these fishes? Yes. What if you brought in a fish that ate baby lobsters? Would that be good? No. So I went and managed to get a fellowship from Yale University in the Bishop Museum to go to Tahiti. So I sailed down to Tahiti with my wife and then my daughter, Lori, who was then 2.5. Lori's here this evening, and she works now half-time at the Bishop Museum in the fish division. And so we first went to Tahiti, and it was overfished. It's the center of population for the Society Islands, just like Oahu is for here in Hawaii. I think it's 80% of the population of the state of Hawaii is on this island. So Tahiti was overfished, so I moved to Moorea. And fortunately, one friend of mine had a little shack on shore, and he had shower and electricity, and so this was our lab. He let me use this when he was away, and he had a Tahitian caretaker. So I wanted to talk to the caretaker and ask about poisonous fishes and so on. And it came in, he spoke very good English, and I said, gee, how did you learn such good English? Well, when I was a young man, I became a sailor, and I jumped ship in California and spent 2 years in Sacramento. I said, oh, okay. So I asked him, well, where are the fish poisonous, where you shouldn't eat them? Well, don't take any fish to eat from the far side of that pass over there. And then around the corner here in the lagoon, it's very clear in the lagoon, but you can see there's a stream bed right there. And when we get a really heavy rain, this dirty water comes down, the fresh water, and it kills everything and so on. That's when I had the first clue, or one of the first clues, that the ciguatoxic organism settles out early on a new surface very well. I can talk for too long on that, I better stop. Anyway, I went to the toxic reef edge and speared a fish. Let's see if we can get this to work faster. This is called the tonu in Tahiti, and you can't buy it in the market. So I was looking at the stomach contents and so on, and then I was digging a hole, and Paua said, I'll take that fish. And I said, wait a minute, I just got it where it's so poisonous. And he said, well, my wife knows if it's toxic or not. So I gave him this big fish. He didn't come to work for 2 weeks. And when he came in, it was very slowly. And I said, what happened? He said, that fish put 2 families in the hospital for 2 weeks. I said, well, I thought your wife knew how to tell. Well, she fed it to the cat, that's our way, and the cat was fine. Oh, well, I had found out from a doctor in Tahiti that when a fish is very strongly toxic, the cat rushes outside and regurgitates and comes back smiling, so anyway. Well, my first job was in Miami, University of Miami Marine Lab. My plan was to get an NSF grant to work on the biology of the coral reef fishes of the Florida Keys. But when I arrived, the director said, oh, you're going to take the tarpon project. Oh. Well, the tarpon is a tarpon fisherman gave us a vessel, which we sold, and the money he stipulated was for tarpon research. So you just come in and this, well, I was a little bit resistant, but what could I do? Well, it turned out out here we're seining for tarpon, and, there's no coral reefs or anything, and just a lot of mosquitoes and a miserable place to be often. But the tarpon turned out to be an amazing animal. First of all, it's a premier fighting fish. It's so acrobatic, you can't believe it, and the leaping and so on. And it gets very large. The record is 9 feet 2 inches and nearly 300 pounds. And then so we started studying things like the temperature tolerance and the salinity tolerance, because this fish would come in as the baby ones into high tide pools and into mangrove areas and so on. And it has an amazing high tolerance for temperature. And same thing, it could go from fresh water into salt water and back again. It shows stress, but it actually can survive. And then we tagged some, we did some tagging with like this. And put a spaghetti tag under the dorsal fin there. And then big tarpon were being caught at Boca Grande, a famous fishing place. So we tagged some of the tarpon after fishermen would pass the fish to us. And one of my tarpon went to Louisiana from West Florida and was run over by a motorboat. Well, I finally got the NSF grant, and I made one of my first dives in the Florida Keys, and I vaguely knew what the fish were, but I saw this fish and I didn't know what it was. Its actual name is Ripticus. It's Ripticus saponaceus. It's the soap fish. It secretes a very prolific amount of mucus and sort of soapy. And it was at 90 feet and it speared it, and I said, I don't want to swim all the way with one fish, so I put it in the front of my swim trunks. That was a grave error. It was a very powerful urethra irritant. One of the graduate students made up a limerick on this occasion, which I fortunately can't remember. Anyway, there was an invitation for me to join a survey group going to the Bahamas. One of the Exuma Keys was being proposed for a national park. So I was just one of a group. And the Minister of Agriculture and Marine Products of the Bahamas, his name was Oris Russell, and he got to talking with me. He said, I'd like you to come, would you like to be a fisheries officer in the Bahamas? And he said, I'd like to have you make a study of the queen conch. And I said, well, tell me about this. Well, this is a massive shell. It's up to 12 inches long or wide. And he explained it's the main staple food of the Bahamian, but it's also served as a gourmet item in our restaurants. And we're worried I mean, it's more valuable than anything except the spiny lobster. And we know what happened in the Florida Keys. There was a major fishery for this shell, and they overfished, and the fishery collapsed. I mean, you can still find a conch shell there, but there's no fishery. So we don't know anything about this mollusk, how fast it grows, what its enemies are, where it lays its eggs, so on. Well, I said, I'll see if I can find a grad student to do this. Well, back in Miami, there was an invitation to send a marine biologist to the Virgin Islands. And I was asked if I could be the one to go, and they agreed. And I moved the family there. Now, the Virgin Islands were Danish originally, and the U.S. purchased them for $25 million in 1917. Today, that would be about $400 million. Of the three islands, St. John is very sparsely populated and so on. So Lawrence Rockefeller purchased this island and gave it to the United States as our 29th national park. And the marine environment, the coral reefs and so on, are a major feature of the park, and so the Park Service wanted a marine biologist to study them in general. So I took the family down, and we were provided a former Danish estate house to live in, and the road was left something to be desired. Let's see where I am. The area where we would call was Lamasher Bay, and this was the road down to our house, and there's a better road that goes all the way around the island, but if you want to go fast. Well, the Park Service provided a Jeep for us for obvious reason, and we had an outboard motorboat provided, and let's see if I've got the right thing. Well, this is what the State House, and this is Helen with my son, Rodney. Rodney's here tonight from California, and we had all the comforts you might imagine, but we didn't have a flushing toilet because there was not enough rain to fill the cistern for that. And the object you see on the roof up there is a 55-gallon drum I put up and painted it black so that we'd pump water up there and have a warm shower at night. Well, the first thing the Park Service asked us to do was make a map of the island of St. John and charter all the marine environments, whether it's mud or sand or grass, seagrass or coral reef. I thought, oh dear, the island's 9 miles long and 4 miles and bays, one bay after another. It's an enormous coastline. Well, we started swimming it, and one funny thing happened. I have to tell you, this is a remora here, and one was attached to a sea turtle, and it detached itself and attached to my bare chest. And I felt so proud swimming with my remora. But unfortunately, I didn't have anybody to photograph it. Well, we were at wit's end to know how we're going to do this, and then someone said, there's 13 photographs of the island, U.S. Geodetic Survey. Get those photographs and it'll help you. Well, this is the Lamasher area, and you can see the road coming down, and the little white object up on the hill is where their house was, and then the ranger station is down at the base of the hill. But if you look at this map here, which I could point, but you can see at the point here in the middle, the coral inshore, and then you can see a white band of sand, and the whole big mass out in the middle here is seagrass, mainly Thalassia and Cymodocea. Well, that sand band made it very easy to, we towed divers, and Mrs. Helen and she's got the aerial photo and an overlay, and we are reporting the bottom, what it looks like. We had a little dive sled which you depress and being towed to the boat, and you just go like this, and you go down deep, and you just go like this, and you come right back up. You can come out of the water like a porpoise if you'd overdo it. And so we finally finished the map, and Helen, I had, as the first year grad student from the University of Miami, Herb Kumpf, his name was, and he and Helen published this in the Bulletin of Marine Science. Well, we got to wondering, why doesn't the sand band grow up to the coral reef? Why doesn't the seagrass grow up? And I answered and said, well, inshore, the sand is going to be coarser and not solid, but in the deeper water it'll be finer, and the spermatophytes, the seagrass roots, can take hold. Yeah, but what about down here where it's 40 to 60 feet? Why don't you check the sand? And I found it equal. So why isn't the sand growing up to the reef? I mean, why isn't the seagrass growing to the reef? Well, if you have some wave action or an anchor drags in the seagrass bed, fragments float up to the surface. And if they stay very long on the surface, they get a little serputed worm or barnacles, concretions will grow, and they sink. And I was down on the bottom when a piece of Thalassia came about 4 feet from the bottom, and a parrotfish of this species swam up and ate it. And I remember saying it in my face, you did it. Well, how are you going to prove it? Well, here's what I did. The sand band is behind me here, but I made a corridor of these concrete blocks. They're 16 inches by 8 inches, and with 5-inch holes. And then we waited, some time later, and we had our sand band. So there was interest in artificial reefs at that time. Car bodies were dumped, but they didn't last long. Then someone got the idea, automobile tires, perfect idea, tie them together and make reefs. Well, eventually they dislodged in storms. There were 2 million tires taken off the coast of the southeast United States as a result of the tire reefs going down. I said, well, why don't we try make a reef of concrete blocks and see how that works. So we went way out, and I had 800 concrete blocks, and I dumped them over the side. And one man on shore was heard to say, that man crazy, I built a house for that. Well, anyway, I made a big mistake. Being a sailor, I should have known better. I should have had a stern anchor, because the boat was yawing if you're familiar with the word yaw, Y-A-W. It's a good word for crossword puzzle. My blocks, instead of being in a nice pile, they were in an area about as big as a basketball court. So we had to swim down, and one by one, it took several days just to get a big pile of blocks. So then we studied what came to the reef. And we built little tunnels radiating from the middle pile, and spiny lobsters loved those tunnels, so they were all, one at every one of those. Well, we recorded what fish were coming, and grunts, the word grunt is a common fish name for a genus Hemilon. That was the biggest group. Well, I have to project time that finally 2 years and 4 months later, I went in with a big net and fellow divers and swimmers and a large amount of rotenone fish poison and killed everything on the reef. And then we counted all the fish and how many there were, and about half were grunts. Then we went to the, not telling anybody, to the shore reef and killed an area of equal size as best we could guess and surrounded it with nets and killed it with poison. We did that 2 places. Then we added up all the weight of the fishes, the biomass. There was 11 times more biomass on the artificial reef than the natural reefs. You know, there might be some error in guessing the sizes and so on, but it was very clear. But what's the explanation? Well, the grunts are nocturnal feeders in the seagrass. And they range out at night and feed, and the blocks were just their home during the day. So my reef was reflecting the productivity of this huge area. It might be as bigger than this auditorium. So it was a real revelation. Well, Herb Kumpf accepted my idea to be study the biology of the queen conch. And let me see what's coming next here. We decided the first thing we did, I would help him, and these are young conchs about 4 inches long, and that's how we tagged them. And we tagged 100 of them and released them. And then they moved around much more than I expected, so we tagged another 100. And then one day we found one of our conchs was just a pile of shell with the tag. Wow, what could crush this up? My, well, we suspected the spotted eagle ray, and we finally got a spear in one, and this ray was 5 feet across, weighed 41 pounds, and he had 41 conchs in the stomach, and no piece of shell. Well, the elasmobranchs don't have a convoluted long intestine. As most of you know, they just have a straight tubular and a spiral valve inside, and a fragment of shell will not pass through that. So this very fastidious feeder ejects the shells and then picks up the soft part. Well, we found a hermit crab, a large hermit crab that lives in that shell, and it eats it a lot. If it likes another shell, it eats the soft part out with its skeletons and then marches off with a new shell. So when we're tagging, I have to jump ahead a bit. The 3rd year assistant that was there, the shells were getting pretty big, and so we decided to make a big area with a fence of about 10 inches high so that the conch couldn't get outside. And we had just the right amount of seagrass and put 12 conchs in there. Well, he came back one day and said, the conchs don't like it in your cage area. I said, what do you mean? They don't even know they're in a cage. Oh, you come out, I'll show you. They're all trying to get out. Really? Well, they were all at the edge, and they were feeding on the algae on the seagrass. In other words, the conchs feed more on algae on the seagrass than on the seagrass itself. So then he came back another day and said, one of the conchs is missing. And I said, what do you mean? Well, it's gone. There's an old shell there, and I knew the story. That hermit crab could crawled over, it ate one of my conchs, or our conchs, liked it better, entered that, and walked out. So we'd solved another problem. Well, let's see what's next here. Well, we were also studying the food habits for my NSF grant, and this is a mutton snapper, Janice, and I speared him and was bringing him up, and he regurgitated an octopus. And I then opened his stomach, and he had a queen conch in soft part of the body in his, and I knew that fish couldn't. How could he get that conch? Then I realized maybe the octopus is a predator. But then one night we were diving and found an octopus wrapped around a conch with just one bit of spine of the conch. And he took the shell back to his lair, and there was one of our tag conchs. So he had been a predator too. Anyway. Now, when we started spearing fishes to look at the stomach contents, this was the first fish to learn that we were bad news. This is the yellowtail snapper, ICRS13. This is a very intelligent fish. If you start to feed fish, you know, if you're in a reserve area and there's no spear fishing, the first fish to learn to take food from your hand is this fish. But now, there's something I don't know. Somehow, when we would go spearing on a reef, and within a few hours, we couldn't get close to fish anymore. We had to move to a new reef. So the message sometimes is spread out. Maybe fish, there's being speared, they have a distress call. I don't know, but somehow fish have learned spearfishing is bad news. Well, we reported our news back to Otis Russell. Herb had found the conchs in reproduction. The male has a reproductive organ, the homologue of the penis of vertebrates. It's called a verge. It's a very long, slender thing. And the shocking thing about it is many of them have the verge has been cut off. And so there's some predator we never found, a real sneaky predator that maybe it's a crab or a moray eel, we never knew. But that's the bad news, but the good news is that the verge regenerates. So I finally found the large adult female laying her eggs, and she stays in one place for about 24 hours and lays a sticky thread which adheres to sand, and when she leaves, so there's just a little mound of sand that fit in the palm of your hand. So we reported our good news to Otis Russell, and he invited Helen and me to the Bahamas. And as we flew in, looking down at the bottom as we came in over what was obviously dark bottom of seagrass, little patch reefs all have little halos of sandbands around them. Anyway, Horace took us, he said he had heard that the conch lays its eggs in shallow water, which would make it quite vulnerable. So if you can find the egg mass deeper than 30 feet, this would be very good news. Well, why 30 feet? Well, the way the Bahamian fishermen fish for the conch is they have a glass bottom bucket, and they lean over the side and find a conch, and then they have a pole up to 30 feet long with two metal tines at the base and curved upward, and you hold the bucket, the glass bottom bucket, and put this hand down, and the strongest man, the best he can do is 30 feet. So if you can find the eggs, well, I found 48 feet, the egg mass, and so he was pleased. But I also found a queen conch crushed into 7 pieces, and I brought up 3 of them. This is one of them. Well, now, it was on a man in the boat could break up a conch and dump the shell, but they wouldn't be in a pile. So some animal had done that. There was a Bahamian running the boat for us. And he said, "Man, that's the loggerhead turtle." I said, "Really?" "Man, you don't believe me. You go to the marketplace and talk to the man that slaughters the turtles, and he'll tell you conch." I did. Well, I still wonder, the power of the jaws, how could it be? Well, years later, I was in the Great Barrier Reef and just going into a cave when a loggerhead turtle was coming out for a breath of air. Well, I didn't argue, I backed up. But look at the massive jaws. Then I believe that they could do that. Well, the second year we had a program of tagging fish, and Tony Chess, this man standing, was the grad student then. He came from a university in California, and the other man there was hired by a fisherman, hired by the Park Service to run the boat when we were both diving, and he made the fish traps. So we did tagging of the fishes. And we had trouble with the barracuda. Now you could see the tags, we have dish tags on some and spaghetti tags on other. And this fish would take our tag fish before the fish could get to the bottom. So not this fish, I should point out, but its predecessor. It was so clever, when we tried to catch it, it first cut the line, but then we made a steel leader, it would never take the bait. And I finally had to hide behind a reef and have Tony scare the fish near me so I could hit it with a spear gun. And I just barely made it, hit him with it, but he didn't come back, but this one took his place. Well, when we tag fish, this one is the rock hind. And when you first take a grouper like this out to put it on the measuring board, they hold their uppercut out and they fight like hell. This fish went back in the same trap, and we caught it again and caught it again. And I finally took it 300 meters away. 2 weeks later, he was back in the trap. And when we put him out on the measuring board, he was very placid, as if to say, "Get on with this, I want to go back in your trap." Well, what he did was that another fish had come in the trap, which, realizing was trapped and couldn't get out, he should just wait for the moment and that was his breakfast, maybe. We, as I say, caught him 20 times. Well, this is the Nassau grouper. Now, we caught him, I got a note here, somewhere, oh yes. The second time we caught him, he was 2 miles away at Reef Bay. Then he came back to Lamasher, caught again. Then 12 days later, he was 10 miles away in St. Thomas. I was mystified. I mean, we had tagged 4,093 fishes, and we had 1,247 recoverers and so on. And then this one was the farthest away. What we didn't know then, the groupers go to their birthplace first in huge spawning aggregations. And this is one of the biggest mysteries of the sea to me. We always used to wonder how the salmon never found their way back to their stream. Well, we found, of course, as the baby salmon's coming down, he gets an imprint of the chemistry of that stream. So he gets near the outfall of the stream and he's back home. But the groupers, what's floating away from the spawning site is an egg. And how does the egg have that information for an adult male and a female to go back to that same site? We had to protect, when the fishermen find those areas, they fish them, of course, they're always that stupid, fish them to extinction. And we make them reserves when we know about them. But this is something I'd like somebody to explain to me someday. This is a fish that yellowfin grouper, and I just have the record here somewhere. He grew in 25 months, grew from 15 inches to 22 inches. So this was the sort of data that we got from them. Well, I mentioned the spiny lobster that, like the tunnels that we made of the concrete blocks, and they go out at night and collect things to bring back and eat at the end. So there's now and then they get a shellfish they can't crack, and you get a kitchen midden of mollusks and things. But we found this shell. This is a young queen conch. It's only about 3 inches long, and that's the way the lobster. The spiny lobster doesn't have cheetah. I mean, it's got mandibles like this, and it manages to crush the shell in little patterns like that. My wife, Helen, made a study of the West Indian top shell and Lavona pica, or Ceterium pica, 2 different names. And I helped her, and an amazing number of predators on this shell too. One was the octopus. We think octopus is being rather intelligent, but I saw one once that made me laugh because he was wrapped around one of the shells trying to bring it into his lair, but the hole of his lair was too small, but he kept trying. And anyway, then Helen found some. She marked the shells by drilling a notch and painting bright color on it, and the color was mostly gone, but she then kept the record and she's published on the biology of this. But one predator, there was something breaking the shells. That she'd find the shells broken, and some of the paint on it. So she knew this thing in one of her. Well, someone told us it could be a bird doing that, and it's this bird. The oyster catcher. This is one that's just caught a clam. Well, we got permission to shoot 2 of them, and they had top shells in them. I think that's the end of it. Oh no, just one last picture. This is John Steinbeck, the famous author, wrote Cannery Row and so on. He's paid us a visit, and he was anxious to try this scuba tank for the first time. So I took him in shallow water and introduced him to scuba. Now that's all then. Thank you.